They say science is meant to uncover the truth, to bring clarity to the shadows of the unknown. But no one ever tells you what happens when the truth starts to fight back. When it watches you, when it waits for the perfect moment to erase you. This isn't paranoia, it isn't madness. It's what I've seen, what I've lived. And if you're hearing this, it means they haven't found me. Yet. I was just a researcher, someone who believed in logic, in evidence. The Blackwood Institute was my refuge, my cathedral to reason. But now it feels more like a tomb. I can't stop thinking about the patterns. They weren't supposed to mean anything. Data points, numbers. But they've taken over my mind, spreading like a virus. Do you know what it's like to realize that every thought, every memory, every decision isn't your own? That it's all part of a script someone else wrote? There's a pattern in everything, one that doesn't belong. It hides in the ticking of clocks, the hum of fluorescent lights, the static between radio channels. And when you see it, truly see it, it's already too late. You'll start to notice them too. Observers. They're not like us. They mimic us, sure, but they're too perfect. Their eyes hold nothing. Their smiles don't quite fit. They move like they've rehearsed every step, every glance, every breath. And they watch. Always watching. Check your watch. What time is it? 4:26, isn't it? You didn't need to look. You've known it all along. The worst part? I'm not sure I'm even alive anymore, or if I ever was. I've replayed this message so many times I've lost count. Maybe this is just another loop. Maybe this isn't me speaking at all, just a recording, echoing through a hollow shell of what I once thought was consciousness. You don't have to believe me. In fact, you shouldn't. That's what they count on. But if you're listening to this, you've already seen them, haven't you? Out of the corner of your eye, in the moments you can't quite explain. You've felt them, lurking just beyond the veil of your reality. They don't want you to know. They don't want any of us to know. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when the truth is so much worse than you think. Are you ready to hear it? To truly understand what you are, what we are. Because once you do, there's no going back. Remember this. They're always watching. And the moment you look away, they'll know. This is your only chance to wake up. But the choice isn't yours, it never was. It started with Olivia Nash, 28 years old, victim of a car accident, 6 months in a coma. Just another case in the long hours of my research at the Blackwood Institute. Her name barely registered at first. She was just a number, patient 46. Her neural activity should have been flat, subdued, nothing more than the faint echo of a mind at rest. But Olivia's readings were anything but silent. They were alive, vibrant, too alive. At first, I thought it was a malfunction. Equipment can fail, software can glitch, but every retest brought the same result. Her brain wasn't just active, it was impossibly consistent. The same sequence of neural patterns repeating every 4 hours and 26 minutes. Perfect, unchanging. I tried to rationalize it as any scientist would. Maybe it was residual electrical activity. Maybe my equipment was faulty. I recalibrated. I rechecked. I ran the data through every algorithm I had, searching for an explanation that didn't feel wrong. But there was no mistake. It wasn't just the pattern that haunted me, it was the numbers. The timestamp of her accident, 4:26 p.m. Her room number, 426. The duration of her coma, 426 days. It wasn't coincidence, it couldn't be. I took the findings to Dr. Marcus Adler, the senior researcher. I trusted him, admired him. He was the kind of man who could stare into the depths of a problem and see the light of an answer. But that day, when I handed him Olivia's charts, his hands trembled. He said nothing at first, just scanned the pages. His lips moved slightly, as though he were whispering something to himself. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was wrong. Too low, too strained. Fascinating patterns, he said. Tell me, during your work, have you noticed observers? I thought he was joking. I even laughed. Observers? The way he said it, it sounded ridiculous. But his eyes didn't move from the data. And when I looked closer, I saw it. His coffee cup, rattling against the saucer. His knuckles, white with tension. Observers, I repeated, trying to hide my unease. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over his shoulder toward the far corner of the room. There was nothing there, nothing I could see. But the way his eyes lingered, it was as if he expected something to emerge from the shadows. You're seeing more than you're supposed to, he finally said. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. Some things aren't meant to be uncovered. They notice when you look too closely. I didn't understand him then. Not fully. I thought he was just tired, overworked. But now I realize he was warning me, trying to protect me. That night, Olivia Nash disappeared. No transfer papers, no discharge forms. Just gone. I asked the night nurse what had happened, and she smiled. A smile that was too perfect, too hollow. She's been moved, the nurse said. No further details are necessary. When I checked the security footage, all I found was static. At precisely 4:26 a.m., the cameras had gone dark. I should have stopped, should have let it go. But curiosity is a cruel master. The more I searched, the more I found. The pattern wasn't just Olivia's, it was everywhere. Every patient I examined, every dataset I pulled, it was always there. Slightly different lengths, slightly different intervals, but always looping, always perfect. And now, I can't unsee it. The next time I spoke to Dr. Adler, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "You've seen too much," he said. "Delete your data. Forget about this, they're watching." But I couldn't forget. The pattern had already taken root in my mind. And the more I looked, the more I felt it. Like I wasn't alone. Like something just beyond the edge of my vision was watching me back. Olivia Nash was gone. No files, no transfer orders, just an empty hospital bed where her body used to be. But her data stayed with me, burned into my mind like an afterimage. The looping sequence in her neural scans was impossible. No matter how I tried to explain it, misfiring neurons, a feedback loop, it didn't make sense. Consciousness isn't supposed to work that way. It's fluid, dynamic, chaotic. But Olivia's brain, it played the same pattern over and over, as if it were a recording. I ran her data through every system I had, dissecting it down to the millisecond. Every 4 hours and 26 minutes, the sequence repeated. Exactly the same. No deviation, no error. The precision was inhuman. The timestamp of her accident, her room number, the length of her coma. 4:26. I couldn't escape the numbers. They were everywhere, woven into her existence like a signature. Or maybe a glitch. When I asked the night nurse about her, she smiled, not a comforting smile. It was too wide, too calculated, as though she had rehearsed it 1,000 times before. "She's been moved," the nurse said, her voice perfectly even, perfectly empty. "Moved where?" I asked. "That information is not available," she replied. The exact same tone, the exact same words. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, like she wasn't speaking to me, but reciting lines from a script. And when I pressed further, her smile never faltered. Her eyes never blinked. Something about her felt wrong, like she wasn't entirely there, or maybe too present. Her movements were too precise, like a machine mimicking the subtle gestures of a human being. I checked the security footage next. I needed proof. Something to make sense of the emptiness Olivia had left behind. But when I pulled up the recordings from the night she vanished, I found nothing. At 4:26 a.m., the footage cut to static. Just for a moment, barely noticeable. But in that moment, Olivia was erased. I rewound the tape, played it back frame by frame. The static wasn't normal. It pulsed, almost like it was alive. And for the briefest second, I could swear I saw something in the distortion. A figure, watching, waiting. I told myself it was a trick of the light, an artifact of the interference. But deep down, I knew better. They were there, in the static, in the silence, watching. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was tired, overworked. But the numbers wouldn't let me rest. 4:26. Again and again, until it was all I could see, all I could hear. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't random. And it wasn't just Olivia. The pattern was bigger than her, bigger than me, bigger than anything I could comprehend. And whatever was behind it, it was closing in. The data had started to consume me. I wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating. Every waking moment was spent chasing answers that refused to be found. Olivia Nash was gone, but her pattern remained. And it wasn't alone. It started small. I expanded my analysis, pulling data from other patients, first coma cases, then conscious individuals. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to disprove the impossible. But instead I found it. Every patient, every scan, every dataset held the same horrifying truth. The loops weren't limited to Olivia. They were everywhere. Slightly different intervals, slightly different lengths, but always perfect, always repeating. Conscious or unconscious, it didn't matter. The human mind was nothing more than a pre-recorded cycle, playing over and over like a well-worn tape. I compiled the data, every terrifying correlation laid bare in my spreadsheets. It wasn't just brain activity, it was behavior. Actions, thoughts, every decision we make, every emotion we feel, it's all part of the loop. I brought my findings to Dr. Adler, but when I arrived at his office, something was wrong. He wasn't there. His desk, always cluttered with papers and books, was empty. No coffee mug, no notes, no sign that he'd ever worked there at all. I checked the Institute's directory. His name was gone. Faculty records, payroll files, even old emails, all of it erased. Adler had been erased. My hands shook as I opened my inbox. There was a single unread email, time-stamped 4:26 a.m. It was from him. The subject line read, "Some doors shouldn't be opened." The message itself was short, barely a sentence. "They're watching the watchers." I stared at the words for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Was it a warning, a plea, or something else entirely? I tried calling him. The number rang, but when his wife answered, her voice was wrong, too smooth, too perfect. "I'm sorry," she said. "There's no Marcus Adler here. There's never been a Marcus Adler here." I called again, same words, same tone, exactly the same, like a recording. I turned back to my laptop, desperate for proof that Adler had existed. I opened the screenshots I'd taken of his research, his notes, his emails, but they weren't the same. The images had changed, text shifted, details blurred. My own handwriting in the margins had been replaced by strings of nonsensical symbols. Reality was rewriting itself, erasing him, erasing the evidence. That night, I stayed in the lab, combing through every file I had, trying to salvage anything that hadn't been altered. And that's when I saw it. In the reflection of my monitor just behind me was a shadow. It shouldn't have been there. There was no one else in the room. I turned quickly, heart pounding, but the space was empty. I told myself it was a trick of the light, stress, fatigue. But the feeling didn't leave me, the sense that I was being watched, studied. They don't just erase, they replace, rewrite, like editing a script, like patching a program. And the loops, the patterns, they aren't errors, they're by design. Whatever is behind this, whatever they are, they're not human and they're in control of everything. We're not conscious. We're not alive. We're recordings. And the only thing more terrifying than knowing the truth is knowing they've already seen you figure it out. They weren't there before. Or maybe they were, and I was just too blind to notice. But now I see them everywhere. It started in the hospital cafeteria. I was sitting at the corner table, staring at my laptop, when I noticed her, a woman by the window. She wasn't eating, wasn't drinking. She just sat there, perfectly still, staring out into the parking lot. Her stillness caught my eye first. People move, even when they're at rest, shifting in their chairs, adjusting their posture. But not her. She didn't blink, didn't twitch. She sat like a mannequin, frozen in time. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she was lost in thought. Maybe I was imagining things. But then her head turned, not gradually the way a person would, but sharply, mechanically, like a machine pivoting on a hinge. Her eyes locked onto mine, too symmetrical, too perfect. And then she smiled. Not a warm human smile. It was calculated, like someone who had read about smiling but never actually done it. I looked away, trying to focus on my screen, but I could still feel her watching me. That wasn't the last time. They started appearing everywhere. A businessman on the train, sitting across from me, reading the same page of his newspaper for over an hour. The ink was smudged, illegible, but his eyes didn't waver. When I shifted in my seat, his gaze flicked to me. A child on the playground, standing apart from the others. She didn't run, didn't play. She just watched, her head tilting slightly like she was studying an insect. A barista at the coffee shop, moving behind the counter with eerie precision. Every gesture, every motion, perfectly choreographed like a puppet on invisible strings. At first I thought they were glitches, oddities in the crowd. But the more I watched, the more I realized they weren't out of place. I was. They noticed me noticing. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a slight shift in their posture. But then one of them approached. It happened outside the Institute. I was walking to my car when I felt it, that sensation of being followed. I turned, and there he was, a man in a grey suit, standing perfectly still about 20 feet away. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring. I walked faster, fumbling with my keys. When I glanced over my shoulder, he was closer. I hadn't heard him move, hadn't seen it, but he was there, just a few steps behind me now. I got in the car and locked the doors. My heart was racing as I started the engine. He stood there, inches from the driver's side window, his face expressionless, his eyes unblinking. Then he smiled. The same cold, calculated smile I'd seen before. I drove away as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the wheel. But in the rearview mirror I saw him, standing in the middle of the road, watching me disappear into the distance. They're not human. They move like us, talk like us, wear our faces. But they're wrong, in ways you can't explain until you see them. And when they know you've seen them, they don't stop. I've caught glimpses of their faces flickering like a faulty video feed. Their reflections in mirrors don't quite match. Sometimes when I blink, they're closer than they should be, as if the world is skipping frames around them. I don't know what they want, but I know this. They are part of the loop. System administrators, maybe. Debuggers, here to monitor, to maintain, to reset anything, or anyone, that steps out of line. I can feel them closing in, watching my every move, studying me, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Sometimes I wonder if I've already been reset, if I've met them before and simply forgotten. Or worse, if I'm one of them, my programming glitching just enough to let me see the truth. But if that's the case, why am I still here? Why haven't they erased me completely? Maybe they're waiting for me to stop running. Or maybe they're already in control. I shouldn't have gone back to Adler's office. The Institute had sealed it off after his disappearance, following protocol. But protocols mean nothing when reality itself is unraveling. I broke in at 3 a.m, my flashlight cutting through the suffocating darkness. The air was heavy, oppressive, as though the room itself was holding its breath. At first, everything seemed untouched. His desk, his bookshelves, his brass clock ticking softly on the wall. But when I ran my fingers along the edge of his bookcase, I felt it, a seam, a false panel. Behind it, I found them. Journals, dozens of them, their pages yellowed with age, some dating back decades. Adler had been working on this far longer than I'd ever imagined. The entries were frantic, disjointed, each one a desperate attempt to make sense of the impossible. Patterns, equations, diagrams of neural pathways that spiraled into infinity. And then, something more chilling. Names, dates, locations. Stockholm, 1986. A researcher found dead in his lab, the word loop carved into his desk. Tokyo, 1992. A neuroscientist vanishes after publishing a paper on recursive consciousness. Moscow, 1997. An entire facility disappears overnight, leaving nothing but static on the surveillance tapes. This wasn't new. The patterns weren't new. Others had seen them. Others had tried to expose them. And all of them were erased. One entry stood out. A series of equations Adler had scribbled in a trembling hand. Mathematical proof, undeniable and terrifying, that human consciousness isn't continuous. It's not a stream, not a flow. It's a loop. We aren't living. We're replaying. Every thought, every memory, every decision. It's all part of a pre-recorded cycle, repeating endlessly. Some loops last minutes, others years. But none of us are truly free. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing. The equations were elegant in their simplicity, horrifying in their implications. And then I saw something I couldn't explain. My own name scrawled in the margins of the page, followed by a date, today's date. My hands shook as I flipped through the journals, searching for more. That's when I saw it, the symbols. They weren't letters, they weren't numbers, they were wrong. Shapes that seemed to shift and writhe on the page, defying comprehension. I tried to photograph them, but every image came out blank. I tried to transcribe them, but my handwriting twisted into strings of binary code. Even now, I struggle to remember what they looked like, as though my mind is actively erasing them. Adler's final entry was scrawled across the back cover of the last journal, the ink smeared as if he'd been writing in a frenzy. The loops are deteriorating, error rates increasing, consciousness is fracturing. They're updating the system, debugging, maintenance in progress, proceed with next cycle. It hit me like a freight train, the gaps in my memory, the strange dreamlike quality of old recollections. They weren't natural. They were signs of the loop resetting, of my consciousness being rewritten. Even now, I can feel it happening. Details slipping through my fingers, events rewriting themselves in real time. My mind is a patchwork, stitched together by forces I can't see, can't fight. And the watchers, those hollow, perfect faces, they aren't just observing. They're maintaining, editing, ensuring that the program runs smoothly. I thought I was uncovering the truth. I thought I was fighting back. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe this is part of the loop. Maybe my revelation is just another layer of the program. A subroutine designed to make me feel like I've broken free, when in reality, I'm still trapped. I can't trust my own thoughts anymore. I can't trust my memories. And if you're hearing this, you can't trust yours either. They're rewriting me, and soon they'll rewrite you too. If you've made it this far, it means they haven't stopped you. Not yet, but they will. This isn't a story, it's a warning, and if you're hearing it, then you're already part of it. You've felt it, haven't you? That nagging sense that something is off, the déjà vu that lingers just a little too long, the moments you can't quite account for. You think your thoughts are your own, you think your choices are real, but they're not. None of it is. I didn't want to believe it either. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overworked, paranoid. But the patterns don't lie, the loops don't lie. Have you checked the time? Don't bother. You already know what it says. It's 4:26, isn't it? It always is. They've built the perfect illusion, our lives, our memories, our identities, all carefully crafted to keep us from seeing the truth. But cracks are forming. The system is breaking down, and now you've seen through it, even if only for a moment. That's why they'll come for you. They don't tolerate deviations. You think you're safe because you're sitting in your home watching this, but they're already there, in the static of your TV, in the flicker of the streetlights outside your window, in the corner of your eye where you dare not look. I've tried to fight them, tried to stay one step ahead, but I can feel it slipping. My thoughts, my memories, they aren't mine anymore. Pieces of me are vanishing, rewritten, erased. And now I have to ask myself the question that keeps me awake at night. What if I was never real? What if I've always been one of them? Think about it. Why are you listening to this? Why are you still here, hanging on every word? Maybe you were programmed to. Maybe this message isn't a warning at all. Maybe it's just another part of the loop. You've been here before, haven't you? You've heard these words, felt this chill, thought this exact thought, over and over and over again. The watchers don't just observe, they manipulate. They design. They construct realities within realities, loops within loops, until you can't tell what's real and what's not. Until you start questioning if you're even real. But here's the twist, the thing that will haunt you long after this ends. If you're questioning whether you're conscious right now, you're not. Real consciousness doesn't doubt itself. And if you're certain you're awake, that's exactly what a programmed mind would think. Do you feel that? The weight of the air around you, the silence pressing in. That's them. They know you're aware now. I don't know how much time I have left, or if this message will even reach you the way I intended. They might have already changed it, rewritten my words into something safe, something harmless. But if you're still hearing my voice, then there's one thing I need you to remember. This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last. The loop is always perfect, the program is always precise, and no matter how far you run, no matter how much you think you've escaped, you'll always end up right back here, at 4:26 every time, every loop. And when this ends, you'll forget, just like you always do, until the next cycle begins. So tell me, before they reset you, what time is it? You already know, don't you? You've always known.